Let's Go-Karting, a Destiel fanfiction written and read to you by Vermilion Novak. Dean reached for the door with his left hand, then cursed under his breath as his shoulders protested. "Dean," Sam scolded him, "you can't swear in here. There's going to be families everywhere." "You're right, I'm sorry, geez. I slept on it weird or something, and it fudging hurts." Sam rolled his eyes and opened the door for him. They entered the space-themed fun zone and walked up to the tall front desk, both excited and giddy. "How many games can we play?" Sam asked him, looking up at the bulletin board. "3 each, Dean said, pulling out his wallet. He had been planning to do something big for Sam's 13th birthday for a while, so he spent his last few days at bars scamming some self-righteous assholes, and now here they were. Sam was extremely excited, because when he usually was at these places, he was being dropped off with little to no money to actually play any games. But now, they got to spend an entire afternoon together. "Can we go to the go-karts?" Sam asked, and Dean grinned widely. "Of course, I was hoping you'd say that. 2 rounds?" Sam nodded enthusiastically, so he turned to the desk and bought 4 go-kart tickets, then handed 2 to Sam. "Don't lose them," he said, and ruffled Sam's hair, who quickly patted it back down. They made their way through the small crowds to the go-kart arena. There were a couple other people in line watching the current race speeding down the track, so Sam and Dean joined them. A flat screen hung off the ceiling, and it was playing an instructional video, and Dean nudged Sam and told him to watch it. "Dean, I already know what the flags mean." "Are you sure you do?" Sam crossed his arms. "I can drive a real car, Sammy." "Yeah, but it's not just green, yellow, and red. There's a blue and a yellow flag if you're going too slow and someone has to pass you." "Sammy, I'm not going to be going too slow." "Well, then there's a black one." Dean didn't hear the rest of his sentence because his eyes suddenly found something much more interesting across the room. Helping a small kid strap on a helmet was possibly the most attractive man Dean had ever seen. And that's not an exaggeration. He had ruffled, nearly black hair and an intense look on his face as he made sure the child's straps were properly tightened. He was wearing a ridiculous neon yellow shirt, so Dean assumed he must have been a part of the staff. "Sam, let's get our helmets on." Dean started walking towards the shelf. "Were you even listening to me?" Sam asked, exasperated. "Nah, I drifted out a while ago." "You're unbelievable," Sam laughed and grabbed one of the red helmets, pulling it over his mop of a head. "Can you buckle it?" "Sure, but you gotta lean down so I can reach with my arm." "Really, Dean? Since when does a pulled muscle call for so much complaining?" "Since I couldn't lift my arm higher than my frickin' shoulder. Now get down." Sam grumbled and squatted, looking up at the ceiling so Dean could reach the buckles. After a moment, he figured out how to strap them together, and he smacked Sam's helmet. "There you go, dude." He turned back to the helmet shelf and grabbed a blue one the next size up. Sam went to watch the race, and Dean tried to put on his own helmet, but he screamed in pain. He groaned madly at himself and rested his head against the shelf in defeat. "Do you need help?" he heard a low voice say behind him. Dean turned around to find the attractive man standing right there. Dean faltered for a moment before his mind caught up and he was able to force words out. Yeah, I hurt my arm. I can't lift it high enough, so..." Dean lifted up the helmet with his right arm awkwardly. "That's okay," he nodded, and took the helmet from Dean. He opened the visor, then helped pull it over his head. Dean used the time to study his face closely. He had nice pale olive skin, but it didn't seem like it was all one solid color. Like he had a pink and purple galaxy hidden underneath, and if the lights hit it right and you were looking, you might be able to catch a glimpse of it under his eyes or on his cheeks. Dean looked up at the blue eyes, which he found were looking at his own face, probably at his freckles, which made Dean embarrassed. "Tip your head up," the boy mumbled, and Dean obliged, his heart fluttering. It kind of made Dean angry that he was getting so flustered. He'd usually have been able to crack a witty joke or something, but this guy's eyes and voice were setting him off of his usual game. So he was just standing there, blushing like a virgin, lost for words. The boy's fingers brushed against his cheek as he tightened the strap, and Dean held his breath, trying not to shudder. He felt vulnerable with his neck bared, but it wasn't a negative feeling. In fact, the way the blue eyes that were locked on his neck and fingers lingered even after they were finished made Dean's body unusually excited. "Thank you," Dean murmured after he had removed his hand, and Dean tipped his head back. He received a curt nod and slight smile from the boy, then turned back to find Sam. "How much longer?" Dean asked once he found him. "I think they have one more lap," Sam replied. "I'm gonna beat your ass at this." Sam laughed. "You can keep telling yourself that, Dean." "Well, I have more experiences with driving actual cars." "Yeah, well, I've played Mario Kart." "Oh my god," Dean laughed. "Well, no one's gonna throw bananas out on the road." "They're getting the checkered flag," Sam smiled and pointed. "Sweet, let's get ready. You get your ticket?" "Yes, Dean, I do." "Do you?" Sam sassed. "Of course I do." Dean reached into his pocket. "I'm not a... Oh, shit. Fuck." "Dean," Sam warned. "Wait, did you lose yours?" "I still got the receipt, though. I'll just have to talk to somebody." He immediately spotted the blue-eyed boy from earlier talking to another person in a staff shirt. "I'll be back. Don't lose yours," he said to Sam, then walked back to the boy. He touched his shoulder hesitantly and found that it was surprisingly warm. "Hey, I can't find my tickets." The boy turned around and looked at him. "That's okay," he said, squinting his eyes. "Do you have the receipt?" "And what was your name?" "I'm Dean, and yes." He pulled the receipt from his pocket and handed it to him. "So, what's your name?" "Nice, real fucking smooth." "Mine?" "Oh, I'm Destiel," he replied, squinting even more over the receipt. "Oh, that's a cool name. I'm sorry, I must have dropped mine or something. It's my brother Sammy's birthday, and I don't really have enough money to buy the tickets again." "It will be okay this time, but you really should make sure you don't lose them." Destiel handed the small paper back. "Thank you," Dean smiled brightly at him. "You're a lifesaver, Cass." Destiel looked at him slightly confused, but nodded again anyway. "I'm here to help," he said. Dean smiled at him again and then returned to Sam. "Everything's okay," he assured. "Looks like more than okay," Sam grinned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I think you're sweet on him." "Oh, shut up, Sammy. I'm not sweet on anybody," he said, even as he felt his cheeks light up. "Believe it or not, Dean, I do know you, and I've been around you enough to know how you act around people you like." "Yeah, right. I hardly like anyone," Dean scowled, watching some people unbuckling themselves and climbing out of the go-karts. "Yeah, that's why I can tell you like him." "Shut up, Sammy. You don't know what you're talking about." Dean flicked Sam's cheek and he yelped, rubbing at his face. "Okay, it's time to get on now." Dean pulled him into the line that was forming. Sam handed one of his tickets to Destiel, and Dean stood there awkwardly. "It's okay, Dean. You can just walk in." Dean nodded and mouthed thank you, trying to cover up the fact that he liked how his name sounded on Destiel's tongue as they entered the track. They both climbed onto the cart, Dean's arm reminding him to do so gingerly. When he reached for the buckles, he cried out in pain. He cursed under his breath again and waited uncomfortably for someone to help him put the straps on. Sure enough, Destiel approached him. "Do you need help?" he asked, sitting on the side of the cart facing Dean. "I'm sorry," Dean said, disappointed in himself. "It's okay," Destiel assured him, and reached for the buckles, pulling them over Dean's head and helping him buckle them. Dean's heart got excited again, with his hands so close, and he scolded himself with Sam's words floating around in his head. Destiel tightened the straps and smiled slightly. "There you go," he said, and closed Dean's visor for him. Destiel got up and went to help the next person. Dean waited after a few minutes until Destiel stood in the front line of 7 carts and called out the rules in a commanding voice. Dean was definitely listening this time, but unfortunately not really to the words, more to how commanding and deep his voice sounded. When the car in front of him finally pulled away, he stepped on the gas and sped close behind. The first race went pretty well. He passed people a few times, but it wasn't ever able to pass Sam, which really bothered him because he was the only one he really wanted to beat. So on the second race, he put his all into it. He smashed into a few people though, which was definitely against the rules, but he yelled sorry back to them and he was being sincere, so what can you do? Apparently something, because he noticed Castiel waving a black flag at him, and suddenly he wished he had listened to what that meant. He thought he heard Castiel yelling stop, so he slammed on the brakes. Castiel walked up to him on the track steadily, with a stern look on his face. "Did you not see the black flag?" he asked, his voice firm and intimidating. "I'm sorry," Dean said sheepishly. "You're driving much too violently. I don't want to kick you out. This is about having fun, not winning. If you don't slow down, you won't be able to race again." Dean nodded, embarrassed, and Castiel returned to the sideline. When the lights turned to green again, Dean started driving much more carefully this time. Of course, he didn't win, so when they climbed out of the carts, Sam teased him. "You got a black flag, Dean," he laughed, "and I still won. Shut up, I totally let you win." "Yeah, right," Sam rolled his eyes and got his helmet off. Dean turned around and found Castiel standing there, and he jumped, startled. "Do you need help getting the helmet off?" he asked, and Dean blushed. "I'm sorry I went too fast," Dean said, and Castiel shook his head. "It's okay, everyone does it sometimes. But you have to pay attention to the flag. That's why we have them." Dean nodded and lifted his head up so Castiel could reach the straps. After he pulled the helmet off of Dean's head and placed it on the shelf, he turned back to Dean. "Have fun with your brother," he smiled, and Dean grinned back. "Thank you," he laughed slightly, before leaving the go-kart area with Sam. The rest of the night was indeed fun. They spent most of their money on arcade games, and they beat each other pretty equally. Except Dance Dance Revolution. Sam has never once beat Dean at DDR, and Dean holds that pretty close to his heart. Dean bought them both large pretzels, and they went to eat them outside in the cool night air. "Did you have fun?" Dean asked him once he finished his food. "Yes," Sam smiled massively. "It was my best birthday so far. Thank you." He hugged Dean's side, and Dean laughed, ruffling his hair. "I'm glad," he said. "Want to head home now?" "After I throw away the trash," Sam said, taking Dean's wrapper and his empty cheese cup. While Sam was inside looking for a trash can, Dean noticed someone standing in the shade on the side of the building. He squinted his eyes and realized it was Castiel. He walked close to him, but before he asked, he realized what Castiel was doing. "I wouldn't have guessed you smoked," Dean said, startling a puff of smoke out of Castiel. "Oh, well, I do," he rasped before taking in another breath of it. "Would you like some?" he asked, breathing it out again. "Sure," Dean said, and reached for it, then cursed because he forgot about his arm injury. Castiel smiled and held it to his lips for him. After he pulled away, Dean laughed slightly, and some of the smoke escaped through his nose. They finished the cigarette pretty quickly, and Castiel stomped it out on the cement. "Where's your brother?" Castiel coughed a bit. "He's throwing something away inside," Dean said, starting to feel cold now that the cigarette was gone. "Do you live around here?" Castiel asked suddenly. "Pretty close, like 8 minutes away," Dean said, looking at Castiel's eyelashes. Castiel seemed to think for a moment before turning to Dean. They were very close, and even though it was dark, there was a small light nearby, so Dean could make out his face. It looked pretty under the lighting, and he smelled like smoke. Dean suddenly felt tension in the air, to find Castiel bite his lips while his eyes flickered down to Dean's. His heart sped up again, and he licked his lips instinctively. "Do you want to hang out sometime?" Castiel asked under his breath. "Yes," Dean whispered in awe, and Castiel smiled. He stepped closer to Dean and cupped his cheeks with his hand, giving him enough time to pull away. But of course Dean didn't pull away. He watched as Castiel's face drew closer, and he leaned in slightly. It was a very soft brush of lips, and it was over in under 3 seconds, but it was somehow the best he had ever experienced. "I'll give you my number," Castiel said, and Dean breathed finally, pulling his phone out and unlocking it. Castiel entered his number while Sam walked out of the building. He spotted Dean and walked towards him. "Sorry, I was saying goodbye to that one. Oh, hello." He paused when he noticed Castiel. Castiel looked up at him and smiled. He handed Dean's phone back and extended his hand for Sam to shake. "My name's Castiel," he introduced. "I'm Sam," Sam grinned and looked over at Dean, who was still pink in the face. "I'll see you guys later," Castiel smiled and winked at Dean, then made his way back to the building. Once the door shut behind him, Sam wolf whistled and Dean shoved his shoulder. "A dream come true." "Oh, shut up." Thank you for listening to this Podfic. If you would like to read the original story, you can find it on Archive of Our Own. The link is in the description.